All right, tonight I'm going to be doing a simple butternut squash soup in the Instapot. So I actually have my Instapot Mini here. It is a 3-quart, so that's one of the smaller ones that you can, well, I think it's the smallest one that you can actually buy. But it does what I need it to do. Now, whenever you're working with butternut squash, one of the most common issues I find that people have is cleaning it. It's not an easy, thing to clean, so I'm just going to talk about that for a second. At the bottom of the squash, you'll have like the pods with the seeds. So what I like to do is I like to start just by taking the top off. And this one's pretty uniform. Sometimes you'll see ones that are like really skinny near the top and more of like a bulb at the bottom. This is pretty uniform all the way through, but I know that this is the bottom here. So I'm going to cut it right about there, and we'll look and we'll see. So this is all solid, this piece. This is the easiest piece to work with. This is the one that everybody wants to cut. Everybody tries to avoid this because it's a little bit more tricky. To peel your squash, it's really thick. You can use a peeler. I do, however, like to use my chef's knife and just go down the edges like this. Also, if you're going to be doing a lot of prep with your butternut squash, you want to wear gloves, because it has this like waxy film on it, and if you do like 3 or 4 of these, you're gonna have this really like thick film on your hands. It's gonna be hard to get off, so bear that in mind. The skin is really thick, so you want to get a fair amount off. I'm not really wasting a lot here. If you use a peeler, if you leave too much of the bits underneath, it's actually really bitter, so that's another reason why I prefer using a knife. Scoop that peel off to the side, and then, yeah, this is the super easy part to work with. I just want to dice it for this recipe, so I'm just going to just cut it into some sections. This recipe that I shared with you, 2 cups, probably 2 good heaping cups of diced butternut squash. I won't require all of this, so I'm not going to prepare it all, but I am going to show you how to clean the other side of the squash. All right, so to finish this bulb half, don't cut it in, usually people go and cut it in half before they peel the outside, and it makes it harder to peel the outside. So take the bottom off now. You can see where the seeds are here. Set it up so it's nice and flat and sturdy, okay? And then same thing, you're just going to take your knife all the way around the edges. Always be careful when you're working with hard root vegetables like this. It's easy to slip and cut yourself. Now you go ahead and cut that in half and expose the seeds. And then just with a spoon, you can go ahead and you can scoop those out. I'm not a big fan of the squash seeds myself, but some people will save them and toast them and eat them like a pumpkin seed. There you go. Now, if you were going to go ahead and dice these end pieces, I would usually slice it like so. And then you can grab, just break it up into some little pieces like that. I'm not too particularly bothered by, how pretty the squash is going to look, because as long as they're cut in a relatively, even equal size, we should be fine, just as they cook, have around the same cooking times. But we're going to be pureeing it, so whether they're perfectly uniform and square isn't really a concern. All right, next piece is the fresh ginger. So just a quick trick to peel the outside of the skin, guys. Take the side of a spoon and peel like that. Some of these better pieces with my knife. This ginger was frozen. I typically keep it frozen, and then I'll grate it when it's frozen solid with a microplane. It helps break down the fibers. It's just good for adding recipes on the fly, but for this, I'm going to cut it into a couple of chunks, just like so. For this recipe, I also have some fresh sage ready to go. Just going to need just one big leaf of that. Sage is really strong, especially a little bit goes a long way. I've got about 1 liter of low sodium vegetable stock, 1 large white onion, just roughly chopped. Okay. Once again, we're pureeing, so it doesn't really matter. Go ahead and measure out your 2 cups of your diced squash. And then I also added to this recipe, it's just a little extra touch that I can add. You can omit this if you want, and that's just a little bit of maple syrup and a little bit of organic cider vinegar to add a little extra flavor. Also going to have a little bit of nutmeg. So just get this thing preheating. What you're going to do is you're going to, if your unit has a saute button, you're just going to turn that on, and we're going to wait for it to flash hot or say hot, and going to preheat the pot. All right, so Instapot is preheated, nice and hot. I'm going to take some olive oil, put 1 tablespoon in there about. Just enough to coat the bottom of the Instapot. You can tell by the way that it's hit the metal's definitely hot. I can already smell the olive oil the second it hit. Go ahead and add in your onions. I'm going to start to saute those out with your sprig of sage. And season with some salt and pepper. Remember, always add a little bit as you go. You can always add, you can't take away on the salt, so. Really smell the sage. There's no garlic in this recipe, but that doesn't mean, if you really love garlic, you can put a little bit in there. I wouldn't just put in too much, it'll take over. So a recipe like this, you really want to showcase the squash. We're going to let this saute out for about 2 to 5 minutes. All right, almost there, about another 2 minutes. I'm just going to give it another little stir. I'm going to get a little bit of color on those onions before we move next. Now, maybe you're asking, hey, this is an Instapot. I thought I could just put everything in there, close the lid, and call it a day. And yeah, well, you could do that. You could literally put all the ingredients in there, stock, everything raw, cover it, pressure cook it, puree it, yes, and you're going to get a soup, but it won't have the layer of depth of flavor that you're doing here. The reason why we're sauteing first, and that's the why. That's the part I always like to explain. And that is because we're trying to release some of the natural sugars out of the onions, and then we're going to do the same thing to some of the squash to caramelize them a little bit before we go ahead and add our liquid and cook it through. That's how we're going to really bring these extra flavors out. All right, now you can start to see the caramelization on the bottom of the pot. That's great. That's all flavor building. So just kind of push the onions over to one side. You could remove them and put them back in after, but that's okay. We're trying to make this easy. Add in the better part of my squash. But not too much, don't want to overload the pot. I want to be able to let it kind of caramelize a bit. Had to add some more time to my saute. Put that in there, some ginger. Once it's been in there for about 2 minutes or so, just give it a really good stir. And stir it all together now. More color on that squash. I've got my little bit of nutmeg. Add that in there as well. We go for 2 minutes or so. You can go ahead and, you can use nutmeg in this recipe. If you don't really like nutmeg and you want to change it up a little bit, you could use a little bit of clove or you can use a little bit of cinnamon. The key is to not put too much. A little bit goes a long way with all those spices. So just very sparse amounts. All right, I can really smell those aromas now. Give it a good stir. Some color there. That's great. I'm gonna add the rest of the squash in now. The extras I added to this recipe, first is just a 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. Gonna give it a nice tartness. Balance with some acidity. I don't want mine to be too sweet, so you can go 1 tablespoon or 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. I'm just gonna go with 1. I don't want it to be overly sweet. I'm going to go ahead and unload the 1 liter of stock into there. All right, so that's all in there. Next step, let's go and fire your lid on, crank it over. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually pressure cook this for 10 minutes. So there's 2 ways you can do it. You can push a pressure cook button, or there's a manual button. Those will both do the same thing. I'm going to push pressure cook button there, and then I'm going to add in up to 15 minutes. Then you just set it, forget it. Make sure that your pressure release valve here is not set in the open, not in venting. You want it in the ceiling, okay? Make sure it's there nice and tight. And once it comes up to temperature, it'll seal the lid, start the countdown, and then we'll get back to it then. All right, so timer's gone off. Now we are going to turn off the Instapot. And we're going to release the valve, and hopefully my one puppy here does not like the sound of the Instapot, so if there's some barking, I apologize in advance. Luna. Yeah, Luna likes to try to attack the Instapot when it's unpressurizing. Like it's almost done. Yeah, when the tab releases, you can take it off. Let's go ahead and grab this out. have a little look-see. Make sure everything is cooked, nice and soft. Yeah, everything's broken down. Try a little taste of the broth. Just kind of see where the salt's at. Yeah, not bad. See if I can. I definitely need a little bit of salt. I'm just gonna try to fish out that piece of sage. No need to puree this. Pop that out. And then using my immersion blender, I'm gonna blend this. More salt. Blend until smooth. Double check that seasoning. Ooh, that's hot. Still require more salt. I also use that low sodium vegetable stock. Just a bit more. And you know what? I like to add a little punch of heat to mine, just to make it my own. A little bit of this, just a tiny bit of hot sauce. I'm just gonna put just a couple of drops in there to give just a little bit of punch. You could easily do this with some cayenne pepper. Would be another way that you could do that. Time to set up a couple of bowls. First bowl was dirty. Missed in the dishwasher, I guess. And that's how you use the Instapot to make a nice, delicious, quick soup. Put some pumpkin seeds in there. And if you wanted, you could garnish with a little bit of sage, but I'm not going to bother with that because I don't want to eat that. And there you have it.